For one cutteth a tree out of the forest, the work of the hands of the workmen with the axe. They deck it with silver and gold. They fasten it with nails and with hammers that it move not. So one of these covenants is going outside, cutting down a tree, bringing it inside your house, and decking it with gold and silver.
That's a Christmas tree, bro.
Exactly.
It was considered completely acceptable for a man to grab a woman in the streets on December 25th and do whatever he wanted with her. And no one could have any complaints if she was out of her house on December 25th, she was fair game. If she was out of her house on December 25th, she was fair game. And that was part of the Saturnalia, part of the grand celebrations of December 25th. What about Christmas presents? In the early Roman times, in early pagan Rome, the Roman emperors insisted that the Jewish community bring offerings to the emperors on December 25th. And the Jews were forced to give these presents to the emperor on pain of death. In later incarnations of this ritual, not only were the Jews compelled to give these presents to the emperor, but non-Jews as well were forced at pain of death. Eventually, this evolved into gift giving generally among people, that people would give gifts not only to the emperor but to each other as well. And then, very, very late in Christian history, this whole thing was linked to Santa Claus and his supposed gift giving to children, and that became the whole custom of giving Christmas presents. And it's actually a quite modern custom that people voluntarily gave presents to children on Christmas. Nicholas, not Saint Nick, but Nicholas, was born in Ferrara, Turkey in 270 CE, and he was later named the Bishop of Myra. He died in 345 CE, and much, much later, about 1600 years later, the church, they sainted him in the 19th century, and they gave him a day. And of course, St. Nicholas's Day is December the 6th. Has absolutely nothing to do with Christmas whatsoever. St. Nicholas Day is December the 6th. Just because today we celebrate St. Nicholas's memory on December 25th, and I'll explain in a few moments how that happened. St. Nicholas was one of the chief bishops who convened the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE. If you want to see the work of St. Nicholas up on big screen, so there's this great film that's coming out by Mel Gibson, and you can watch the film and you can see on big screen why Christians massacred Jews throughout history. Realize that John and other parts of the New Testament that St. Nicholas was also involved in editing are the texts that paved the way for the Holocaust, right? It was St. Nicholas and friends who taught people it was the evil Jews who killed their God. So it's because of the work of St. Nicholas that we can now go visit mass graves at Auschwitz. How did St. Nicholas become the Santa Claus that we know of today? It all started in 1087. In 1087, there was a group of pagan sailors. And these sailors, who probably were not terribly interested in St. Nicholas from a Christian point of view, went to his grave in Turkey and collected his bones and took his bones to a site in Italy, in Bari, Italy. The problem was that Bari, Italy was a city which was largely dominated by the grandmother cult, or the cult of Pascha Epiphania. The grandmother cult was a group that worshipped a pagan deity, a pagan female deity who was boon-giving. She would give gifts to people. And specifically, this god, Pascha Epiphania, used to fill children's stockings with gifts. Okay? When Nicholas's bones arrived in Bari, so the cult ousted the grandmother and they replanted St. Nicholas in her place. And members of this group used to have a pageant on December the 6th where they would give gifts to each other. So this was the beginning of the Nicholas cult. Now the Nicholas cult ended up spreading to the north. And it was eventually adopted by German and Celtic pagans. These groups had previously worshipped a pagan god by the name of Woden. Woden is the father of Thor, who you've probably heard of before. He's also the father of Tues, who is another great pagan god. He's also the father of Balder, who we heard about earlier. So Woden, this chief god, he had a long white beard, and he rode a horse through the heavens one evening each autumn. So what happened was Nicholas was merged by these Celtic and German pagans. He was merged with Woden. And when he was merged, so he shed his Mediterranean appearance, realized that up until this merging of Woden and Nicholas, how did Nicholas dress? In shorts and a t-shirt. He lived in the Near East. When he arrived in the north of Europe, so suddenly he was all garbed in winter clothing. He mounted a flying horse, rescheduled his flight for December, and donned this heavy winter clothing. He took on this long white beard. How did he become a Christian hero? So the Christians were in Northern Europe making a bid for pagan observance. They wanted these pagans to come and join Christianity. And exactly as they had done with other pagan observances, they went to the Woden cult, and they said to them, become Christians. And they said, we can't, we worship Woden Nicholas. So they said, bring Woden Nicholas right in, but make the day when he makes his flight December the 25th. You just have to move it ahead 19 days, and then everything's fine. So they moved his day ahead 19 days. They became Christians. And December 25th became the day on which St. Nicholas' memory was celebrated, even though until today, if you get a copy of the New Testament, flip to the back, open it up and look at the saints' days, St. Nicholas' Day is December the 6th, not December the 25th. But it's celebrated December 25th because they were trying to bring in these German Celtic pagans. Okay. What about our Santa Claus? Where does he come from? So our Santa Claus was largely created in the 19th century. The story is as follows. In 1809, Washington Irving, do you remember the story of Rip Van Winkle? The Legend of Sleepy Hollow? Okay, these are all written by Washington Irving. He wrote a much less well-known satire about Dutch history called Knickerbocker History. Several times in his book, Knickerbocker History, he refers to St. Nicholas by his Dutch name, Santa Claus. And the name Santa Claus was born. Okay, now we still don't exactly have our Santa Claus, but we're getting close. Okay, what happened next? That was 1809. There was a Christian theologian by the name of Clement Moore, who also happened to be a very talented writer. One night in 1822, he was riding in a carriage, and Christmas was approaching, and this fellow Clement Moore wrote a poem. I have a copy of the poem sitting in front of me, and I'm going to read to you a few lines from the poem. It goes as follows. This is 1822. "'Twas the night before Christmas when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care and hoped that St. Nicholas soon would be there. This poem, in addition to calling him Santa Claus, now gave him 8 reindeer and named them, and it had a Santa Claus who descended through chimneys. So it was in 1822, because of one poem by Clement Moore, that Santa Claus first got his reindeer and the idea of coming down through chimneys. But still, Santa Claus did not look like the Santa Claus that you and I know about. At that time, Santa Claus still looked like this very gruesome, scary character wearing a long black furry coat. He was short, bent over, he carried a cane. He was a very frightening creature up until that point. The truth is that there's still remnants of the Santa Claus that used to come to actually punish children. Do you remember the song? You better not pout, you better not cry. I'm telling you why Santa Claus is coming to town. Now, why are you telling the kids don't pout and don't cry? What are you warning them for? The answer is because Santa Claus, when he arrives, if you're pouting and crying, will beat the living daylights out of you, yes? So that's the reason, right? Up until the late 1800s, this was the Santa Claus. Okay, now what happened? The way that Santa Claus was transformed was there was a magazine called Harper's Weekly, and they had a great Bavarian illustrator by the name of Thomas Nast. And Nast, from 1862 through 1886, produced 2,200 cartoons of Santa Claus. So in addition to making Santa Claus a jolly fellow, so Nast also located Santa Claus for the first time ever in history at the North Pole and gave him elves. Now, of course, this is crazy because St. Nicholas lived in Turkey and was buried in Italy. So he has nothing to do with the North Pole whatsoever. But nevertheless, Nast created this whole mythology about how he lived with his elves in this workshop at the North Pole making toys for children. He was a jolly fellow. So it was really Thomas Nast that created the jolly Santa Claus that we know about. There was still one thing that was missing, though. Up until the late 1800s, even the early 1900s, whenever you would see a picture of Santa Claus, he was always dressed in black.